Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. At least 31 people killed at an army recruitment event in the Republic of Congo. Uganda probes an unidentified disease outbreak, 12 people killed. Plus, Ethiopia talks with rebel group Oromo Liberation Army (OLA) ends without any agreement. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin on a rather tragic note. At least 31 people have died and dozens others injured during a deadly stampede in the Republic of Congo. Reports say the victims were trampled to death as they desperately attempted to get through a stadium gate for an army recruiting event. According to security officials, thousands of youths gathered at the Mikel Onano Stadium in Brazzaville to be among the first to get enlisted in the Congolese armed forces. The incident took a rather tragic turn after people tried to push the gate open and others tried to jump over the wall into the stadium. At least 145 survivors, albeit injured, are at the military hospital in serious condition. Well, prosecutors say they have now opened an investigation into what happened. Well, away from Congo, here in West Africa, at least 9 people have been killed in a raid by gunmen in the western region of Cameroon. According to authorities, the attack happened at a busy market in Bamenyam town. Officials suspect separatist fighters who want to establish an independent state in the neighboring English-speaking region. Since 2017, more than 6,000 people have died in separatist conflict and close to 1 million others displaced. Uganda appears to be battling with a mysterious illness that has left at least 12 people dead. Health authorities are investigating the unidentified disease that broke out in a span of 2 weeks in Kyotera district, that's in the central part of the country. Well, among the symptoms discovered on affected patients before their death are swollen limbs and rashes on the skin. The Ministry of Health says it has collected fresh skin samples from one of the patients who died at a local general hospital, and its findings are yet to be shared with the public. Over in Liberia, at least 2 people have been killed and 18 others injured after a car plowed into a crowd that was celebrating the election victory of the country's president-elect Joseph Boakai. Well, the incident took place outside Mr. Boakai's party headquarters in the capital, Monrovia. Now it's still unclear if the incident was an accident or a deliberate act. According to the Election Commission's final results, Mr. Boakai narrowly defeated incumbent President George Weah in the November 14 presidential runoff. He secured 50.64% of the votes cast. Well, the election has passed largely without incident, and it marks only the second democratic transfer of power in Liberia in more than 7 decades. The first was when Mr. Weah swept to power 6 years ago. Mr. Weah conceded election defeat, ending a presidency marred by graft allegations, but helping to ensure a smooth transition of power in the once volatile African nation. Well, let's now bring in Lanre Arogunde. He was an election observer in the Liberia polls that happened on November 14. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too. Let's begin with your work in Liberia during the elections. Speak to us about your observations and experience.
Well, my first observation was the fact that this was an election that was largely driven by young people, and that may not be surprising because 70% or about 70% of the Liberian population are young people, that is, young people between the ages of 1 and 35. So at the rallies by the political parties, you saw a lot of young people displaying a lot of enthusiasm, singing, dancing, and passionately talking about the issues in the election. Another observation was also the role of women. We also had very, very large participation of young, women who went out in large numbers in different party colors, and again talking passionately about their, candidates. I could say that I observed the fact that the choice by the electorate in Liberia was largely driven by what we can call issues. They were looking more at the performance of the outgoing president now in terms of what their expectations were, 6 years ago. And it would seem that for majority of them, these expectations were not met. Of course, you had people who were arguing that, in Liberia, a presidential term is 6 years. So if you get elected, you spend 12 years. And they were saying that, well, he had just spent 6 years. The person that was there before spent 12 years. So maybe if he had the same period, but they said, no, we thought that he could have done, better. So these were, the observations. And the fact that, the people really were ready and prepared to make democracy work in their country.
Also, what do Liberians expect, for this new president? Being that the poll result was, it was a tight race between George Weah and now President-elect Joseph Boakai. We saw a largely peaceful election, and like you've mentioned, driven by young people and women. What are these people looking to or looking for from their new president to make their country better?
Well, I think most of them will be expecting the new president to deal with the problem of infrastructure. I think the fact that in the southeast of Liberia, for example, they had the problem of roads. Remember, even when George Weah was campaigning, on one occasion, he had to fly by helicopter or even go through Cote d'Ivoire. So they really felt disappointed. I mean, if you are getting to Liberia, the road from the airport to the main town is yet to be completed. So I feel that they will be looking at how this new president could fix the problem of infrastructure in the country, and of course, large youth unemployment and other problems that we might say is quite common when we were looking at West Africa.
Well, and we know Joseph Boakai is no stranger to Liberia politics. He was a former vice president and he ran against George Weah. Exactly. So, but now that we've come to the end of the election, we have a new president in Liberia. We saw that President George Weah congratulated President-elect Joseph Boakai almost immediately, after the poll victory. One can say this could be difficult for losing candidates to do, in some countries. Perhaps, is there a lesson to be learned here?
A very big lesson, And that is why we need to talk about, why President Weah, considered a defeat to his opponent. And the main reason was the fact that the process was very, very, transparent. And it's like everybody knew their job and did their job. The political parties had agents in all the polling, units. Liberia, they call it polling places. The agents were very, very patient. They ensured that they had, signed copies of the results after they had been counted and recorded. And in the process, where they suspected some anomalies, they came out. And you could see trained party agents who were referring to the polling counting manual by the National Electoral Commission in Liberia, a 100-page document. In some cases where they are trying to decide whether a ballot was properly marked or not, to arrive at the decision, they refer to that. That is one thing. Then secondly, in their own case, after the polling units, the next collation level is at what they call the NEC office in each of the counties, which is the equivalent of states in Nigeria. And these counties are presided over by magistrates. Now, the results from each polling unit, which is already contained in a sealed, poly bag or envelope, is then reopened at the NEC office in each county, and again in the presence of the party agents, and this time around, local and international observers. They bring out these results sheets one by one, read it out to check if there were mistakes. In some cases, it could just be addition of 1 or 2 or 3, where they notice, and before any correction is made, they agree, and everybody gets a copy of the results from each polling unit, including foreign local observers. So anybody could help to point out and say, oh, there's a mistake there. It is when they are satisfied at the level of the county, at the NEC office in the county, that they have the correct results, that is then transmitted to NEC, in Morovia. So as it were, President Ware knew that, he had lost because it was a very, very, transparent, process. There was nothing to dispute about that. And for me, that is really the key lesson, in the sense that everybody did their job. I need to say something about the role of women in Liberia. In most of the polling places, usually you have 5 polling officials, 5 NEC officials. One is a presiding officer, one is a voter identification officer. Usually they would have 5. Usually you have either 2 of them women, in some cases 4 were women, in some cases the presiding overs were women, young people. And in any case, you didn't have voter suppression. Ballot boxes were not snatched. And this is a country that is under police. They don't really have many policemen in Liberia. I observed the election in the southeast of the country, where in fact the equivalent of what we call the DPO in Nigeria, or even commissioner of police, or in the counties, were going around on motorbikes. They didn't have the luxury of vehicles. The policemen at the police stations were not armed. In fact, in some cases where they didn't even have policemen, men of the fire brigade just stood there to maintain some law and order. Yet, nobody came with guns, nobody snatched ballot boxes, nobody fired bullets. So at the end of the day, democracy will work when, first and foremost, political parties are willing to make democracy work. Secondly, the people themselves, the patience. I will probably begin to rate Liberians as the most patient people in the whole world. In fact, the counting process is better imagined than discussed within a short time, like this. The process of, the ballot boxes are sealed when they bring them to the polling centers. Then they are unsealed, they read out the numbers on the seal. After voting, they put them together. Even the counting process, they will first count the ballots and rearrange them in 50-50s before they start counting of those candidates. In some cases, because of the problem of infrastructure, where there was no electricity, they made use of lamps, and even we observers, we were not part of the process, but we had to put on, our own, the torchlight or the torch on our mobile, phones. So the environment itself, you could say that was an environment where if people want to perpetrate violence, would have been easy. So minus the fact that there were some tension, some arguments on the line, but you saw people, they just put on lamps, and yet nobody rushed in and grabbed, ballot papers and disappeared with it. No threatening of anybody. So that was what we saw. And I guess, like I said, it was in that context that President Ware had no choice other than to concede defeat, because doing otherwise will be plunging the country into another round of crisis. And we must commend him, because he is very much aware of that. He is very much aware of the fact that Liberia went through very, very difficult periods, not just in the terms of war. They also had the Ebola epidemic or pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic also, ravaged and devastated the country. You see a lot of, young people, young girls, carrying babies. So it was a sacrifice that he needed to make. But I'm also trying to say that the circumstances was such that it would have been an anti-climate. If said he was not going to concede defeat.
Thank you. Indeed, thank you so much, Mr. Larry Arogundade. Thank you for sharing your experience as an election observer on the Liberia elections. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm grateful.
Well, still ahead on the program. South Africa once again calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war in the Middle East. More details in a moment. Please join us again. Welcome back to the program. We're now in Ethiopia, where the government says the latest round of peace talks with the rebel group Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, has failed to end with an agreement. The talks, which held in the Tanzanian city of Dar es Salaam, hoped to bring peace for Ethiopia's largest Oromia region. The government's negotiator, Redwan Hussein, accuses the rebel group of an obstructive approach and making unrealistic demands. The Oromo Liberation Army, in response, says the Ethiopian government is only interested in co-opting it rather than addressing the country's security and political challenges. The OLA, which the federal government has designated a terrorist organization, has been fighting the government for the last 4 years, citing what it calls the oppression of the Oromo ethnic group. Now to the war in Israel. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is calling for an immediate ceasefire to the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. President Ramaphosa made this disclosure during a virtual BRICS meeting in which South Africa is the current chair. Leaders of the BRICS bloc of developing nations discussed the Israel-Palestinian conflict but failed to agree on a joint declaration. BRICS comprises of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In August, the group agreed to admit Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, Argentina, and the United Arab Emirates from January 2024, in a move that is seen to aim at accelerating its push to reshuffle a Western-dominated world order.
We call for, first, an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. Second, the opening of humanitarian corridors so that aid and other basic services such as food and medicines can reach those in need. Third, all countries to exercise restraint and to refrain from fueling this conflict and making it worse, including by seizing the supply of weapons to the parties. The actions by Israel are in clear violation of international law, including the UN Charter and the Geneva Convention. In its attacks on civilians by taking hostages, Hamas has also violated international law and must be held accountable for these actions. The collective punishment of Palestinian civilians through the unlawful use of force by Israel is a war crime. The deliberate denial of medicine, fuel, food, and water to the residents of Gaza is tantamount to genocide. We believe that BRICS has a vital role and a voice in a widespread international effort to achieve a just and lasting peace. As individual countries, we have demonstrated our concern at the death and destruction that's taking place right now in Gaza. Let this meeting stand as a clarion call for us to combine our efforts and to strengthen our actions to bring this historical injustice to an end.
Meanwhile, South African members of parliament have voted to close the Israeli embassy in Pretoria and to suspend all diplomatic relations. The governing African National Congress, ANC, has long been critical of Israel, hereby supporting the motion in parliament. The motion called for the closure of the Israeli embassy and suspension of ties until Israel agrees to a ceasefire and commits to binding negotiations. 248 members of parliament voted in favor of the motion, while 91 members of parliament were in disfavor. We're still in South Africa. In an effort to address the gender-based violence and femicide crisis in the country, the Department of Social Development and in collaboration with the National Shelter Movement, South Africa is hosting the 3rd National Shelter Indaba in Johannesburg. The gathering aims to deliberate tangible solutions to combat what has been declared the 2nd pandemic in South Africa. Our correspondent Innocent Samosa reports.
Tshegofatso Pule, Karabo Mokoena, Oinene Mkhotyana, Zolile Khumalo, These are some pictures of women who died in the arms of their loved ones. The panel discussions at the National Shelter in Durban covered critical topics, including awareness and intersectionality of GBV and substance abuse.
We are trying to also link it with you guys, with GBV. We said to GBV colleagues, come on board, even though it's focusing on a substance abuse, but we believe that the methodology and the tools can also apply in this sector.
Rose Bowley from Etembeni Community Center says in her area, it's common for women and children to lose their lives at the hands of those they should be able to trust.
Of course, it's everywhere in the Northern Cape. I think the problem is that our media exposes just much less than that in Gauteng and Cape Town, but there's a lot of communities where that happens almost at a weekly basis.
The haunting reality of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa, it is a harsh truth that the country continues to grapple with daily. In the current financial year, the department has allocated more than 200 million rands over 4 years to support 134 shelters providing victims support services nationwide.
Thank you so much for that question. I think, yes, you're right. Gender-based violence is at unprecedented levels in the country. And I don't think it's necessarily the amount of money that's getting put towards the scourge. I think we need to work smarter. We need to work collaboratively.
Not only looking at psychosocial intervention, but we are also looking at skills development, empower women with skills development so that when they leave the shelter, they can begin to be independent economically and break the cycle of dependency on men.
To try to squeeze
South Africa's Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, says murder and crime involving gender-based violence have shown a significant decrease. He, however, admits that the fight is far from over. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
On the sideline of Nigeria's president's trip to Berlin, Germany for the G20 Compact with Africa Economic Conference, President Bola Tinubu has emphasized that with a resilient democracy, Nigeria is well primed to attract foreign direct investments. The president witnessed the signing of 2 memoranda of understanding, one on the supply of gas from Nigeria to Germany and another for $500 million worth of renewable energy projects in Nigeria. Speaking at the 10th German-Nigerian Business Forum and welcoming the new deals, President Bola Tinubu assured German businesses that with Nigeria's stable political landscape, foreign investments into the country are secure. Outlining some of the achievements of his administration, which include his economic reforms, the president emphasized his commitment to sustaining the reforms and building stronger Nigerian-German relations.
Shake off the military era syndrome. Shake that off. You may have all other news from sections of Africa, but for Nigeria, democracy is there, is here, and we are partners. The relationship that we seek is for all to remove all hurdles to progress, to put Nigerian-German relationship on the first-class seat of development and prosperity. I know you seek no hurdles, you seek no delays. Yes, you might have experienced that in the past. My duty is to showcase few members of my team, assure you that I'm there, open door policy, whatever is the audio, believe it is gone unless I'm not aware of it. Any hurdle on your path, any obstacle that you've experienced in the past, believe it is gone unless I'm not aware of it.
And that's where we end Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.